Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the GAA Lean Body Podcast. I'm your host, strength and conditioning coach and sports nutritionist Brian Keane, here to help you with all things GAA related fitness. Today's episode, we are going to talk about an old topic in a new way, plyometrics for GAA players, so unlocking speed, muscle and leanness. So I did a blog post on this, it's available on briankeenfitness.com, and I'm going to expand and explain a little bit more in detail about some of the things that you need to know about plyometrics for GAA players. I did a podcast in the last season explaining the biggest mistakes players make. So we're going to kind of come full circle with it today. So for any GAA player that's looking to enhance performance, you already know that speed is a vital asset on the field. So incorporating plyometric exercises into your training regimen can help you achieve that explosive power, increase your speed, and it can take your game to the next level. Additionally, when combined with the proper nutrition and strength training, which I'm going to expand on in today's podcast, plyometrics can be a game changer for building muscle, losing body fat, and achieving a leaner physique. I'm a big fan of it because in today's podcast, we're going to explore how you can utilize plyometrics to improve the speed, but also simultaneously work towards that body composition goal. It works very well hand in hand. In my GAA Lean Body program, I try and pair the plyometric movements in there with some strength training, which we're going to come back to as we go through today's podcast. First point is understanding plyometrics. So plyometric exercises, for anyone unfamiliar with the term, involves rapid and forceful movements that activate the stretch shortening cycle of the muscle. So anything where you're exploding upwards. You'll regularly see this in things like box jumps, depth jumps, or clapping push-ups, etc. So that training method enables your muscles to generate maximal power in minimal time. It's why it works so well for GAA players, because on the pitch, you're doing a lot of sprinting, you're doing a lot of shuffling side to side, so it directly translates into performance benefits on the pitch when you incorporate it into your program. So this is essential when you're looking to, say, accelerate quickly or reach higher top speed. So tracking somebody back or running with the ball towards the goal so that you're actually not getting that slowdown as your muscles fatigue. So you can train and condition your body off the pitch to have that performance increase on the pitch. So as I mentioned, the most popular ones are going to be those box jumps, depth jumps, bounding, lateral hops, things along those lines, single legs, box jumps, clapping, push-ups, all of those fall into the category of plyometrics. So if you think of start position, and then exploding out into a finished position, that's going to be a plyometric-based movement. So those movements can help improve that explosive strength, your reaction time to some degree, and overall athleticism. Then number two, you need to focus on speed-specific plyometrics. So when the goal is to build speed, to enhance your speed on the field, you need to prioritize speed-oriented plyometrics, exercises that are going to perform and mimic the movements that you'd encounter during a football match or during a hurling match or during a camogie match. So things like explosive jumps, bounding drills, lateral shuffle jumps, and incorporating these movements in training can optimize your neural pathways, translating directly to improve speed and agility on the pitch. So how you design your plyometric program is very much down to what you're looking to do. In the episode where I spoke about the biggest mistakes GAA players make when it comes to plyometrics, one of these was doing them too late in the workout when you're not making it a body composition element. So if you are trying to work for pure performance on a plyometric based program, no, I don't, full disclosure, don't do plyometric only programs. So if your goal is pure performance, that's my program's not going to be a fit for you. My program has a body composition element into it. So I've merged the plyometrics and the strength training and the conditioning into one program so that you get the benefits of body composition change, building muscle or losing body fat alongside getting stronger, getting fitter, getting faster. So certain movements like bounding drills or explosive jumps from one leg to another aren't something I include. What I like to do is put them in as a circuit alongside static strength moves or body weight strength moves so that you're able to work for a slightly higher repetition so you get that body composition and fitness gain as well. But if you're working for pure lateral jump, for example, you want to improve your lateral jump, you're going to have plyometrics at the start of your workout. You're going to have maybe 1 to 3 repetitions, and you're going to have a long rest period between 2, 3, 4 minutes in some cases, depending on the program you're following. Whereas I don't factor that into my program. It's not something I'm a massive fan of unless you're working with high-end professional athletes, something that I haven't done in years. It's not my specialty anymore, but it is worth knowing and understanding if you are a pure performance-based athlete and you're not looking for any secondary goals. That's how you might design your program. Number 3 then is progressive overload. This is something you'd have heard me and potentially other trainers speak about when it comes to strength training. Progressive overload is where you're gradually increasing the strength, gradually increasing the weight in the movement pattern that you're doing so that you're able to potentially get stronger in it. So let's say you're doing 20 kilograms on a bench press, progressively overloading on that for 3 sets of 8 or 3 sets of 6 would be going to 22.5 kilos. And then several weeks later, going to 25 kilos. That's progressive overload in a nutshell. So gradually increasing the intensity and difficulty of your plyometric workouts over time is how you incorporate it and how you take that same philosophy from strength training and apply it into plyometrics. So you might begin with a low impact exercise and then master those fundamental mechanics before progressing to more challenging movements. A very basic example of this would be a strict 2-legged box jump and then exploding or and then transitioning into a single leg box jump where you're doing the same movement but you're doing it on right leg and then you're doing it on left leg, or repetitions on one side and then changing it. So that's how you progress that. So adhering to a progressive overload approach ensures that your muscles and connective tissue can adapt gradually. Plyometrics are a little bit of a high risk, high reward style of training, meaning that you can get injured relatively easy in a plyometric movement, same as if you're doing very heavy deadlifts or very heavy squats or compound lifts. The risk to reward is a little bit of a disproportionate trade-off. So that's why it's important with plyometrics that you do it in a very structured way, meaning that if you're starting with higher repetitions on a technically less difficult movement and then progress upwards, that's the way to do it. So what I do in my GAA Lean Body program, there's 3 phases for that program. Phase 1 has that heavy body composition and strength and conditioning element built in. Phase 2 is a little bit more of strength work. And then the graduate program, which is only for people who have graduated phase 1 and phase 2, is a lot more performance-based. So the plyometrics are built into that version of the program because it's moving away from that body composition into pure performance. But you've built that adaptation. You're now into an optimization phase for your training because you've already built your foundation, you've built your base. But progressive overload and reducing your risk of injury while continuously pushing your speed and power boundaries is important. So make sure you start small and build up. Number 4, combine plyometrics with strength training. So to build muscle and achieve a lean body composition, plyometrics should be supplemented with a well-rounded strength training program. So this is something that I have a little bit of a head bash with some strength and conditioning coaches because context is key here. If you are, as I mentioned, purely looking for performance, you're probably going to separate these 2 elements of training potentially into 2 separate phases. So something like a strength phase for 6 weeks, normally during an off season or maybe even a pre-season, and then a plyometric phase coming into the middle of a season so that you're peaking around championship. They might not even overlap. Whereas I actually like putting them together to get the best of all worlds. So you'll incorporate something like a squat or potentially a trap bar deadlift and a lunge and a bench press, and then aiming for progressive overload with those to stimulate the muscle growth. And then that strength training not only promotes muscle hypertrophy, so you can build that muscle in size, but it also increases your metabolic rate so it can support your fat loss and improve your body composition. So you're doing that and then adding your plyometrics in on top of it or putting them together. Something that I've done quite effectively in the past, and this is in some versions of the GAA Lean Body program, not all because there's lots of versions depending on position, depending on level, etc. But combining a compound lift with a plyometric. So something like a bench press and then supersetting with a clapping push-up, or something like a barbell squat supersetting with a squat jump. They can pair quite well. And if you're designing your own training program and you're just looking to do something that's quite intense, you're not looking to, adapt or optimize or really push everything to the next level, you just want a good workout, that's a nice little way to put those 2 things together. You can go with a compound lift, a strength lift, and then combine it with a plyometric. That's something that I still do in my training to this day when I get bored, just to mix it up a little bit. as I mentioned before, you always want to have a structured training program so that you're nearly guaranteed to hit your goal. But if you're just messing around yourself, that is something that pairs well, assuming you keep the form very strict on the compound lift in particular. Number 5, mind your nutrition. It's very hard to get away from any episode on building muscle and losing body fat without talking about nutrition. So to effectively shed or reduce body fat and reveal that lean muscle tissue underneath, you have to pay close attention to your nutrition. There's no real way around this. You have to fuel your body with a well-balanced diet. It includes lean proteins, complex carbs, healthy fats, and an abundance of fruit and vegetables, things I've talked about before on this podcast and even in last week's episode. An adequate protein intake will support that muscle growth. So your 1 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. If you are, an 80 kilogram athlete, you want to have 80 to 160 grams of protein per day. That's just a general best practice recommendation. If you're doing it yourself, if you're working with a sports nutritionist, you might be able to go a bit higher with this and make the adjustments, or a bit lower depending on how you're using your carbohydrates and fats. But that is a best practice. But for more on that, go back and check out last week's episode. I think you got a lot of value from that. So with the adequate protein, make sure you combine it with the controlled caloric intake. So you always want to adjust your calories based on your goals, making sure it's in a surplus if your goal is to build muscle, around maintenance if your goal is to building muscle tissue, reduce body fat, and if you have a heavy focus on weight reduction or fat loss, you probably want to be in some form of a deficit. Although I like to cycle my players in and out of a deficit when possible, even if weight loss is the goal, so that they don't suffer the performance on the pitch, with the exceptions maybe of goalkeepers. This is probably the one place where I'll make the exception depending on position, because you don't want the performance to be impacted by reduction in energy levels, where that's not going to impact a goalkeeper as much, depending on if you have a goalkeeper playing as a 16th or a 15th man, that again might fall out the window. But in most teams, when the keeper is doing a traditional role, football I'm thinking of more so than hurling here, you're going to get away with lower calorie intake and a caloric deficit if someone has a weight loss or fat loss goal, because performance won't be majorly impacted by that caloric restriction, whereas that could happen if you're out the pitch in a position anywhere outfield. Number 6, consistency and recovery. Consistency is the key to achieving any fitness goal, which you'll already know. The plan you can stick to, the program you can stick to, the nutrition you can stick to is always going to be the best in terms of getting well-rounded results from any program, because you can have the best program in the world, but if you don't follow it, it won't really matter. So you need to balance your workouts between plyometrics, strength training, sufficient rest and recovery. Now I know that can be the most difficult thing as a GAA player, because you're in this balancing act as a GAA player. It's why I love working with players so much, because you need to get fit, you need to get strong, you need to get fast, you might want to build muscle, might want to lose body fat. You're probably working a job or in college, you train multiple times a week, you have games at weekends, and then you've got your gym sessions potentially on top of that. So you're in this balancing act and trying to stay in this Goldilocks zone all the way through. And it's what makes it so interesting as a coach to see how individual players respond to that, by looking at their nutrition, by looking at their sleep protocol, by looking at their supplementation, by looking at their training regimen and making the adjustments depending on the time of the season. So make sure that you build in that recovery. Allow your muscles to adapt and repair by incorporating rest days as needed. Again, this will vary whether you're doing rest days before games or you're doing primer sessions before games and then potentially rest days before that. Stretching can work well for some players, particularly if you are on the tighter side or an older athlete. Foam rolling, myofascial release, trigger point, and quality sleep above all else. I think sleep and nutrition, probably 80% of your recovery. Then maybe ice baths, some cold exposure, cold showers, and those other forms that I mentioned, trigger point, massage guns, etc. All those are marginal gains. They can help, but focus on your nutrition, focus on your sleep, and that'll help a lot when it comes to your recovery. Overtraining is something that can have adverse effects on performance and hinder progress as well. So listen to your body and avoid pushing too hard without adequate recovery. I've touched on this in a previous episode on the overtraining spectrum about strategic overreaching. Something you want to do as a player is make sure that you're overreaching during certain times of the season, meaning that you're going a little bit further than your body can. It's normally what happens traditionally in pre-seasons on the pitch. It's when you're doing all those sprints and you're doing all that heavy pitch work, it's to get you prepared to strategically overreach and get your fitness up in a shorter period of time, in that 2, 3, 4, 5 week period depending on the training sessions and your coach, so that you're ready for games when they come several weeks later. That's strategic overreaching. But if you keep pushing that without the adequate recovery, you'll go into overtraining, that overtraining spectrum, something that I think every single GAA player needs to be aware of, whether you're at school, in secondary school, in college, or you're an advanced athlete, because it's so easy to fall into overtraining or under recovery. Symptoms for those are both the same: low energy levels, poor performance, potentially poor sleep, low sex drive. They're all under recovery and overtraining. Under recovery just means you need to adjust the recovery. Overtraining is a little bit harder. You might need to take a step back, let your body recover for several weeks, potentially several months, depending on how long you've been pushing it for, and then gradually increase and ease it back in. As I mentioned, it's an episode in itself. It's a whole topic in itself. So if this is something you struggle with, I highly recommend you go listen to that off the back of this episode. Number 7, seek guidance. While plyometrics can be beneficial, it's essential to seek guidance from a qualified strength and conditioning coach or a personal trainer. Now, obviously, my program fits this bill, the GAA Lean Body program, but even if it's not me or my program, you do want to work with somebody who's qualified in what they do. Now, don't listen to the average gym person or a teammate who's not qualified, because plyometrics, as I mentioned, are high risk, high reward, same as maxing out in a strength deadlift. It's one of the reasons I don't actually incorporate traditional deadlifts in any of my programs. They're too high risk. Although they're great movements, the risk of those is so high, meaning you can get injured by just having a misalignment of your form in the starting position, and that can put you out for up days, weeks, months in some cases. So you want to be mindful around that. And anyone that has that strength and conditioning background, or a qualified personal trainer who understands biomechanics, their expertise can ensure proper technique, your program design, and progression to maximize your results safely. With plyometrics in particular, more so than any other program, the context really matters depending on what stage you're at. If you're in an adaptation phase, you're going to have a completely different plyometric-based program to someone who's trying to optimize, or someone who's trying to just get fitter and incorporate it into a strength and conditioning program like I do. So you need to have that context, or else it's going to look like, why are they doing that? Why are they taking 3-minute rests between box jumps? They only did 1 rep. Or why are they doing 20 box jumps repeatedly for time? What's the logic to that? Or why are they doing that? So having a professional overview can explain the context to why somebody is doing one thing and somebody else or a different player might be doing something else. So coaching and feedback are especially important for plyometric exercises, as I mentioned, since they involve those high impact movements. So in conclusion, incorporating plyometrics into your GAA training routine offers numerous benefits to become faster, more explosive, while also helping you build muscle and lose body fat and achieving that leaner physique. So the key, as I mentioned, is to stay consistent, gradually progress your workouts, combine those plyometrics with strength training, particularly if you have those multiple goals like I mentioned, prioritize proper nutrition, allow for the adequate recovery, and seek professional guidance if you need it. By implementing the strategies I mentioned, you can optimize your performance on the field and reach those goals, both in terms of speed and body composition. You don't have to choose, you can do both. You just need a program designed around it. So embrace the power of plyometrics to unleash your true potential as a GAA player. That's kind of what you'll generally see people when they're advertising plyometrics and plyometric based programs. You can have all this potential that's kind of locked in there, especially if you're a slower player looking just to get faster, or you're somebody who's been wrapped up in a story that, well, I just can't improve my speed. You can't improve your speed if you've never had a program that works towards that, if you've never focused on glute activation, if you've never focused on plyometrics to improve it, if you've never focused on all the other side benefits and elements of program design that can help you get faster. So don't get caught in that story. Nearly any player, some players, fast players, can get faster, slow players can get quicker. You're obviously not going to be Usain Bolt or, Cristiano Ronaldo in his prime in terms of speed, but you can get faster than what you are currently with the correct program design. So that's everything from today's podcast, Plyometrics for GAA players, unlocking speed, muscle, and leanness. Hopefully you enjoyed it. As I mentioned, this is episode 2 of the new season of the GAA Lean Body podcast. My upcoming program will be starting in it's in the next few weeks. I'll put the details below if you're listening to this when it's been released in August 2023. If you want details and you're listening to this after August 2023 for the off-season program, which is in October, if I'm not mistaken, just pop the details below and I'll send you on information for when the next program is starting. That's everything from me from today's podcast. Thanks so much for listening. Get you all next week.